Cool. Thank you so much, Tanya, for and the LexQuest team for organizing this symposium. And I'm super glad to be joining everyone here and for sparing time on your Sunday to listen to this topic. I mean, just briefly, I work with the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water, and we are among Asia's leading policy research institutions. While I'll be talking mostly about energy access, we do work on various other thematic areas concerning sustainable development in India and abroad. So let's start straight away with the question, why are we talking about energy access in a symposium on climate change? And there are two answers to that, right? The first is it's a key development priority. I mean, access to energy enables people to have, use modern lighting, thermal comfort services, entertainment, cooking, and of course, to support their livelihoods in various manners. But as we all know, we are under this, threat of climate change. The mode of energy access, as well as whether you have access to or not, has significant implications for climate change. In absence of the modern energy fuels that most of us used, those of us who are listening to this, people often end up using polluting sources like kerosene or firewood. So besides having adverse impact on their health, it also reinforces the carbon emissions and contributes to the climate change. And that's why in 2015, the United Nations adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, and the seventh goal of SDG was about ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. I've stated this out because I will be talking about like these elements of what ensures energy, I mean, what comprises energy access, just not about having a connection or a LPG cylinder. And of course, driven by these two priorities, the governments in India at the national and the state level have made several efforts over the past decades to reduce the energy poverty. I'm sure lately we have heard a lot about the Sobhagya scheme, where electricity connections were being given free of cost or at subsidized cost to households. Similarly, the Ujjwala scheme, where the LPG cylinders were being given to the households with required support, and of course several other policies. I won't go into the details of it because I want to focus on where as a country we do stand in terms of energy access. And to basically answer that question, my team and my colleagues at the CEEW, we conducted this pan-India survey, which we call as India Residential Energy Survey, to understand what is the state of access, but also how people use energy in their homes, because that again links back to the question of climate change. And to do so, we basically surveyed nearly 15,000 households. A third of these were urban and the rest were rural. I mean, the way our population is divided. And we covered nearly 21 states. So the chart on the right shows the various states that we covered and the districts within those states that we followed. We did a multi-stage stratified sampling strategy, which is mirroring what the NSSOs also uses. So what did we find from the survey, right? So I would like to divide my discussion on, devote my focus mostly on electricity access and the adoption of clean energy and the energy efficiency in this discussion, because my colleague will also be talking about cooking energy and its interlinks with the gender dynamics in the subsequent section. I think it's the third session that she'll be talking in. So let's focus on electricity for now. So when we look at what is the state of electricity access, we find that, over the past efforts have yielded significant, gains. We as a country are just a few steps away from universal electrification. And we find that 97%, nearly 97% of Indian households have grid electricity. There are a few, around 0.3%, who are exclusively using off-grid because they are often located in remote and difficult locations. And there are around 2.4% households who have not had any electricity so far. And a majority of them are mostly economically poor households, which also multidimensionally deprived when you look at, the wealth and like their house status, their access to motorized vehicles or not, or what kind of energy, other cooking energy sources they're using. Interestingly, we also find around 0.5% households who had grid connection, they got disconnected mainly due to non-payment issues. And this is a topic that I will come back to again because it links back to the definition of electricity, energy access. That is, it has to be affordable, and are people able to pay for the services that they require? An interesting aspect here is, of course, India level numbers look like this, but there's been a rural urban divide in our country. And even when we look at, even the gap is smaller right now, that gap is higher in the rural areas. So most of those who don't have electricity right now are considered in the rural parts of the country. At the state level also, this diversity plays out. And I mean, the regions, most of the northern and central states in India, which were historically had poorer energy access, are the ones where these gaps remain. And they, of course, need targeted efforts to bridge these gaps through appropriate solution. It could be a combination of grid or as well as off-grid solutions. But just having access to electricity connection does not ensure that the challenge has been overcome. So important is to ensure that people have access to reliable supply. And here we find that an average Indian home receives around 20.5 hours of daily supply. Of course, this is based on what households report as um, average hours of electricity supply. It's not the actual measured one. So there can be certain variations. We expect a variation of around an hour or so, not more than that. But and in terms, apart from the supply, we also find that people have multiple power disruptions. So almost 2/3 of rural and 2/5 of urban households face outages at least once a day. And at many places, it's multiple times a day as well. So even though we are extending access, we need to do a lot of work in improving the supply situation. And and this has wide, I would say, diversity across states in India. So this chart shows what is the average daily outage in each Indian state that we cover. And as we see from the left, there are Delhi, Kerala, and Gujarat. They have one of the best power supply situation as reported by the people. But those on the right are Haryana, Bihar, Assam, UP, Jharkhand, which have really high, long hours of power cuts. Especially, and then you can also see there's an urban-rural divide here, like in each state actually, where the rural households end up facing poorer supply, and it's because of a combination of course, gaps in the infrastructure, faults and trips happening because of or the delays in addressing these faults and trippings, but also continuation of scheduled power cuts to because often the distribution companies are unable to supply power in absence of enough liquidity. And I'll come back to this topic again. And but the good part is, of course, we see there are things, there's this huge gap that we need to fill, but there's been a significant improvement in the supply hours over the past 5 years as well. I say 5 years because we've been monitoring the supply situation in the rural areas of 6 northern states through periodic surveys. So in 2015, we did a survey, in 2018, we did the survey, and 2020, we did this pan-India survey. And we find in 3 particular states like Bihar, Jharkhand, and Uttar Pradesh, the supply hours has nearly doubled from average 9 hours in rural areas to 16 to 18 hours. And of course, I mean, this phenomenal change reflects in the way consumers, share about their satisfaction level with electricity. And we find in these 6 states actually that we surveyed, in the past as well, the satisfaction rates among rural population has increased from 25% to 70%. So there's a lot to celebrate, and at the all India level, this number stands at 77%. But the gaps are there, and we need to find where the gaps are higher and, of course, work towards them. And as we see, Assam, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, again, the states where the supply situation has improved have showed that the satisfaction has improved, but at the same time, there are also the states where much more work is required. And of course, this will require that we are monitoring the supply situation through more advanced technologies like smart metering at the distribution, transmission, as well as the household level, and taking corrective and the preventive measures on a real-time basis. Uh, okay, let me just give a context to that graph first. So what we see is, of course, a lot has changed, and that's why we see that the rural-urban divide in electricity access has narrowed down significantly. So we made this chart using data from NSSO, sensors, and various surveys from 1980s to 2020s. We clearly see the light green is the urban, represents urban households. The dark green represents rural households, and we see how the share of households who use electricity as primary source of lighting has been, significantly increasing over the years. And it is the past decade when we see that the gap between urban and rural had sort of reduced on a very rapid pace, and it's very marginal right now. And we hope that it can be completely, done away with in the coming few years. But how do we, coming back to the question of universal energy access, how do we ensure that people have access to affordable as well as reliable supply? Because those are the two issues that remain to be solved. And that's where like this issue of DISCOM financial situation of the distribution companies in India comes into play. What we also, you may have heard, over the past, it happens almost every decade that we have huge bailouts for these distribution companies. And that's because these companies have high losses of aggregate transmission and commercial losses, technical and commercial losses. And so this map shows the variation across states. Of course, the tones in the red are the ones where the situation is much worse off, and the dark black ones are Kerala, and other states in grays are the ones where the situation is better. But overall, at a country level, we see almost 22% of the revenue that should have come to the distribution companies is lost. It's not recovered, and that amounts to almost 85,000 crores every year. And these losses are much higher in UP, Bihar, and Madhya Pradesh, and which are also the states where we saw that sustaining the reliability of supply is going to be a challenge. To give you some perspective, the average AT&C losses in, at the global level is just 8%, and in China it's 5%. So we really have a huge distance to travel there. So we need to understand, okay, how are we going to, in the coming decade, how are we going to ensure that we bring down these losses and are able to provide good electricity supply to all the consumers. And that starts by understanding, what is causing these losses in the first place. So one of the major reasons is that the distribution companies are unable to properly often meter the supply that is being given to the consumers and recover revenue. So in our survey, we find that almost 7% households do not have metered connections, or they are not functioning. And this issue is higher in a few states like Jharkhand and MP, where almost a third of consumers don't have functional meters. But once the consumer has a meter, we also need to ensure that their bills are accurate and they are based on those meters that are installed. But here also we find a gap of nearly 10%, and these gaps are much higher in states like Jharkhand, Bihar, and UP. So if the distribution companies in these states, which have given out several new connections, are to provide reliable supply to their consumers, right? So why, and because of these billing and metering issues, it sort of is like a vicious circle. Sorry, I want to make sure, can you hear me? Tanya?
Yes, sure. We can hear you clearly. It's perfect.
Okay. My internet showed unstable.
A little, yeah, but it's fine now.
Okay, thank you. So, and because of these metering and billing issues, what this leads to, it's like a vicious cycle. It sort of also makes it difficult for the consumers to pay, properly. I mean, there are two reasons to it. One, if you don't get bills on a regular basis, your bills accumulate, and for consumers, it's difficult to pay accumulated bills in one go. It's a financial challenge, right? But if you're not getting them regularly, or if you do not trust your bills, then the consumers are often skeptical of paying their bills, or they just keep waiting for getting their bills corrected. And we have noticed this through several field studies in UP in particular, where we do a dedicated work on understanding the barriers to revenue recovery and helping the distribution companies take corrective measures. And as this graph shows, so apart from this lack of trust issue, and there's also this another economic angle to it, that often consumers have inadequate or irregular incomes, and that of course interferes with the fact that you get the bills on a monthly basis. But many households, particularly those reliant on agriculture, are unable to pay monthly bills, and so what you need here is different kind of payment mechanism probably. And of course, complementing these barriers are the fact that there are often low deterrents in some states to regular payments. So if you see, there are many people around you who are not paying their bills, and there's no, no disconnection drives happening, or there's not much penalty towards it. It sort of incentivizes others to also follow the same attitude or behavior. And so in rural parts of UP, the payment rates are just 15%, just 15%. So 85% of the consumers, rural consumers in UP, are not paying their bills at all. Now imagine if this is the payment behavior, and which is not just a consumer side issue, but also a supply side issue. Discoms will find it difficult to sustain the supply, provide reliable supply, on a long-term basis. They may be able to pull their resources together and do it right now, but how long will they be able to do? And and of course, there's this another part of, how are consumers paying their bills? Because majority of consumers have to go to payment counters, which are often kilometers away, to pay their bills. So how can we make payments accessible to them? In our survey, we find that roughly only 17% consumers pay their bills digitally, even though 70%, 70% have smartphones. So this is, of course, this digital literacy gap, which is hindering people to shift towards more accessible means of payment. So that's another area of, area that requires attention going forward. So in summary, what we need to go forward to address this electricity access issue is balancing the revenue recovery needs with the affordability principles, so that the consumers are able to pay for their consumption. And this, of course, requires, enhancing Discom's capacity for regular billing and connection, effective monitoring system, also having multiple bill payment mechanisms. I've mentioned about that. And of course, engaging with the community and raising awareness that, lack of payment discipline is actually going back to hurt them back. And I think that's where a lot of, different kind of stakeholders need to come together, apart from those working dedicatedly on the energy sector. And of course, the final bit is better targeting of subsidies. We all know that residential consumption of power is subsidized. Almost 64,000 crores different state governments spend on subsidizing electricity. But what we need to do is, of course, target it better to those who need the most, rather than having a wider spread. And let me just quickly now move to another topic, which is also very closely intertwined with energy access, which is that we need to embrace energy efficiency and clean energy in order to ensure that we are sustaining energy access going forward. And that's because, as we know, electrification, nearly 100% electrification has unlocked consumer aspirations. We compared numbers from our survey with the NSSO survey in 2011, and we find that the fan ownership has gone up to 93%, TV ownership to 70%, fridge ownership to 33%. Of course, there's, again, that urban rural split here, But what all these numbers indicate is that the total power consumption in the
Shalu,
residential sector, yeah,
sorry to stop you here a bit.
yeah,
I was wondering if you would like to take up a few questions in the meanwhile, because there are a few questions that
yeah,
participants have of you. So I
okay,
think one is something that you're already. So can I think I can read them out to you, and you can see if you can answer them. Right, I'll do
okay. So
that.
should I pull off my slide?
No, I think we can see
Okay,
if I think there might be questions that can be answered through the presentation, the part of it that is left. Like someone
okay,
asked if cleaner energy and low cost cleaner energy in rural areas or to the households that don't have access, is that the solution and how to go forward with that? So
right,
that's one question. Someone wanted to know the difference between off grid and disconnected households. If you can explain that for them.
right.
Um, Also, another question was lack of perfect metering system. What is the proportion of this problem in urban areas compared to rural areas? So those are
Right.
the questions for now. I think I can take
Right.
these up and proceed
I
if
can
like.
quickly respond to them because
Yes,
they
yes,
relate to the previous discussion itself. So the
yeah.
question on difference between off grid and disconnected. So off
Hmm.
grids are those households. I mean, the way we refer to them, those who are using solar home systems or microgrid connections for meeting their electricity needs. Within the Sobhagya scheme that the government implemented, there was another component of supporting electricity access through such solar home kits because it was often not technically feasible to extend the grid everywhere. So these are those households who may have received these kits through the government or purchased themselves or receive them through social enterprises, so a combination of them. And that's around 0.3%, which will translate to around roughly 1 million households in the country. So it's significant if you look at individual numbers, but as a percentage of population, everything in India starts looking small. And the category of disconnected households is those households whose connection got disconnected because they did not pay for their electricity bills. And that's a regular phenomena that happens across states. And in your bills, you always receive a notice if you're not going to pay your bill, say by so and so date, you may receive another notice following which your connection will be disconnected. So I hope I have answered that. The
Yes.
second question was around the use of clean energy sources in rural areas. And yes, so we do notice that most of the people who do not have electricity right now, like roughly 2.4%, are economically poor. And we also know from our survey that people on the margins tend to use very limited electricity when they start with. So they're just using lighting or say at max fan, and that is also not 100%. So as this figure shows, of the electrified households, only 93% have fans. So 7% are still not using fans. So you can meet those electricity needs, minimal electricity needs, through innovative solutions which are more cost effective than extending grid to them. And of course, there is the threat: if you give them free connection and if they're not able to pay for the bills on a regular basis, then they will be again left out of the grid. So I do believe that there is a important role for DRE solutions to
But
play here.
Shalu, in the
Yeah.
with respect to this, there's another very interesting question that I would like you to take up. It says that
Yeah.
do states which have private players as suppliers, do they perform better as far as access and supply is concerned? One. And when we are talking about profitability, which is important for discoms, what happens when you talk about cleaner and sustainable sources? Does profitability get adversely affected?
Right, right. So the first question on the supply, right? So here, is the supply situation better in states which have private? So the answer is yes and no, in the sense, right now the private players are limited to only metro towns or very big urban areas. So you have private players in Delhi, or you have in Mumbai, or you have say in Kolkata. So we do see that the supply in these areas is better, but it's also better, say, in states like Kerala and Gujarat, which do not have private players. So even though privatization is a big topic right now, we do not have concrete evidence that privatization of discoms in large states, which have both urban and rural population, is going to solve the problem completely. So we do need to experiment with the model, but it is not a panacea, because It's really the governance, how the discoms in these states are governed, which determines their performance. And as we have seen that the performance of discoms in Gujarat, I mean, the Gujarat discoms are one of the best in the country right now, and they are not privatized. So that's a different model that can be pursued, and the learnings from there can be brought into other states as well. The second question on the profitability, which is, it was linked to renewables, right?
Yes.
Right. So we our another team at CEEW does a lot of work on evaluating how adoption of solar would impact the finances of the discoms, and we find actually there are a lot of benefits to be had because discoms have to invest a lot of money in building transmission distribution capacity, or to manage the peak demand at certain times. And actually adoption of renewable energy can help them avoid those huge investments going forward. So of course it comes with an upfront capital investment in the present to avoid more expenditure in the future. But uh, research suggests that there are more benefits to be had. And of course it depends on how the power purchase agreements are signed. In fact, like discoms end up spending so much money by way of locking their demand. I mean, signing these long-term PPAs with coal power plants, which often are used at very low PLF or their load factors, so less than even 40% or 50%. And they continue to pay a lot of money on the fixed costs, even though they are not driving energy, buying energy from them. This came to light during the lockdown when the power demand fell by almost 30%. 28% to be precise. And the distribution companies did not want to buy power from the generators, but they had to still pay the fixed price because that's how the PPAs are aligned. So going forward, actually more adoption of renewables can address this cost of fixed energy and variable cost. And I think I would stop here and can answer the question.
Yes, I think you have answered all the questions, Shalu. If there was another question that was left, you can take it up, or I think you can continue with the rest of it. We have another 10 minutes to go, so you can continue with the presentation.
Perfect. And if it works, people can ask questions on the go. I mean, if it's not difficult for me to answer, I can probably try it.
Sure. Yes, sure.
Right. Okay, sorry. Let me just go where we were. Yeah, so we were talking about how, electricity access has unlocked consumer aspirations. And we are seeing that, annual energy consumption in the country is rising. And domestic sector is the second fastest consuming sector with almost 8% CAGR, the compounded annual growth rate every year, which means that in almost every 10 years, our consumption will double. Well, when we compare with the world level, we are still consuming very less energy, like per capita electricity consumption, just 1/3 of the world average. But given our population and the fact that all the aggregate consumption means more emissions, more requirement to generate energy, we really need to work a lot on ensuring that we use energy as efficiently as possible. And there's a lot of potential on that front. And recognizing that part, there have been a lot of efforts to promote energy efficiency in the country. I won't go into the details of it. It's a timeline which shows the different schemes and legislations that came into place. But the most important one I would like to point out is the standards and labeling program that was started in 2006. Under it, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency started a scheme where, they one by one, they were picking appliances and rating them as to what is their energy efficiency, so that consumers find it easy to identify that, okay, this is a more energy efficient appliance, let me buy it, right? So improving the visibility of energy efficient appliances, because otherwise, to address the information asymmetry that existed. And of course, we all know about the Unnat Jyoti, the Ujala scheme, where the LEDs were distributed by the distribution companies and the ESL, and I hope most of you also have LEDs at your home. Now, what we see because of these efforts, we see that's a mixed story actually right now, and there's a lot that we need to do. So on the LED front, the country has literally leapfrogged. So almost 90% households say that they have in our survey say that they have at least one LED. And as a share of total lighting stock, we see 2/3 of India's lighting stock is LED. It's a phenomenal jump that has happened over the last 5 years. When we look at white goods like refrigerators, air conditioners, geysers, there also we see, 50 to 75% of stock is energy efficient. However, it is the appliances like fans and television, which are literally the mass appliances, 90% use fans, 72% use television, that we see the uptake of more efficient appliances less, particularly in fans. And this again links back to the affordability concern, because we do a lot of field studies and people ask, we use just one fan and two lights and still our bill come for 300 or 400 rupees or 500 rupees. Why is that happening? That's happening because they have very inefficient fans. And the fan efficiency could range from 70 watts to even 150 watts, depending upon how much you have winded it and all. And I think this is the big area where the countries started to look at, but we'll need a lot of push to make sure that we have a very efficient fan stock in the country. Right now, we have a voluntary labeling program for fans. It will become mandatory coming in Jan 2022, where all the appliances, that all the fans will have to be labeled as whether they are efficient or not. That will be a great step, but a lot of barrier to adoption of such appliances linked to the fact that awareness is low about energy efficiency. So when we ask consumers in our survey, how aware are you of this star label? I hope you have seen this one. Only 25% said that they have seen it. Of course, it was higher in urban areas and lower in rural areas, but very wide variation across states. So Delhi or the Mumbai and Maharashtra, they had almost 60 to 80% awareness. But it really goes down, goes below 10% in the states like Haryana, MP, and Chhattisgarh. And we also see that awareness is linked to the urbanized, how urbanized a district or a state is. So more urbanized states are more aware as compared to the less urbanized districts. And we also find that it's linked to also, whether you have bought an appliance which was labeled or not. So if you bought a fridge or an AC where the labels are very, visible, people are more likely to be aware as compared to those who don't even use these appliances. So going forward, we really need to focus on improving awareness about energy efficiency, as well as how to identify those appliances in small towns, villages, and targeting those messages to people in their regional languages, as well as, being wary of their education levels, or as well as their preferences towards how the message is being received. And another factor that we need to focus on is the cost and the consumer behavior. In our survey, we find that 40% consumers rank appliance cost as a key decision parameter. What that means is when they're buying new appliance, these many people rank appliance cost as the most important factor, and other factors follow. So as we think about pushing energy efficient appliances, we really need to bring down their costs through different new business models, etc. And finally, and of course, the usage behavior is equally important. So taking the case of AC, for instance, even if you have bought efficient AC, it doesn't imply that you will definitely save energy, because it is also linked to how you're going to use that AC. So the temperature setting can have a lot of difference on the energy consumption of the AC. And we find just 40% run their ACs at a temperature less than 24 degrees or above. Why 24 degrees is important? Because it's a thermally comfortable temperature. Below that, it's generally not, with every 1 degree increase in temperature setting of the ACs, the consumption rises. Also, whether you use AC along with a fan also can determine how low temperature setting is good enough for you. The feeling of comfort can be enhanced if you're using ceiling fan with the AC, and you can bring the temperature setting of the AC down, which can lead to, again, energy savings. And finally, how often you get your AC surveyed also determines the energy efficiency of it. But we find just 55% get the AC surveyed by a technician every year. So again, on the energy efficiency front, the awareness, the cost, and the behavior are three intervention areas that we really need to focus on a lot. Let me pause here. Are there any questions, Tanya?
Not really. You can go ahead, Shalu, and we can have you. There is one question though. This is about what is the impact of COVID on India's energy transition plans? Where do they stand now with COVID? So we can
Okay.
briefly answer that.
Right, just let me come to it after the slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up in a minute. So, because of course, we started with energy efficiency and clean energy. So, one way to reduce demand is to use it more efficiently. The other is to, of course, uh, consume, create, or rather produce energy where it's being consumed, because we know a lot of energy is lost in the transmission and distribution network. So, if we can avoid that, we can avoid that energy loss. And solar being a clean energy source, there's a lot of
Shalu,
yeah.
so we have less than a minute left now. So
Okay,
I think we'll have to wrap up the session right away.
sure, sure. So okay, I'm just I'll skip this part, I guess, and
Okay.
I think. And I was mainly drawing my discussion on the studies that we have published recently, and they can be accessed from our sites. This is
All
a
right. Yeah.
research team behind this effort, right?